I'm a doctor, a medical doctor. So everything I say, or I will say, is taken from that perspective. From the perspective of the greenhouse effect that clinical medicine has on research, editing, publishing, peer review, everything it touches. It's a mega business. In fact, it's the business. It's the biggest business in the world. It's even bigger than arms sales. Just bear this in mind, because it's an important part of the narrative, you would call it, that I'm going to give you. Okay, I've been asked to open the black box and look at what's inside. And what you're looking at over there in the screen, can you see it?
Yeah.
Is a game, a board game called Get Peered, which is a satire. In Queen's English, it's known as a piss take of the whole system, the system of peer review. Because the game starts at the bottom left hand, and if you cheat enough, and if you steal enough ideas and so on, you get to the House of Lords quicker than your competitors. So all the tricks in the book that we're aware of, from plagiarizing other people's work as a referee, stealing one's ideas, giving them adverse peer review, comments, and so on, are in the game. And you win if you get there first with the highest impact factor points you can get. But you cannot play honestly, you have to cheat. And this is the whole, so that's the board explained. This is satire, which was published as in the Christmas, on the cover of the Christmas B&J, Christmas edition, 2003. Now, so I'm setting out my stall and marking my territory. I am the co-author and co-editor of two of these, two books, and here they are, both of them on peer review, but peer review is in biomedical science. Although at the end of my talk, I will tell you about my efforts to find out about peer review, my doomed efforts to find out about peer review in other disciplines. I'll talk to you about the origins of peer review, and I will talk to you then about the evidence of its effectiveness. And again, remember where I come from. I'm a clinical epidemiologist, I'm a physician. So that's the approach I bring to this. I will talk to you about the gaps in the evidence base for the effectiveness and safety of peer review. I'll talk to you about the concept of quality. Then I will talk to you about the problems that we have, the fundamental, major problem we have now, which cuts across everything and everybody, which is that of reporting bias. I will then talk about possible way forwards and possible medicines to be given to a system which is really on its last legs, as far as we can see. Okay, so what is peer review? The best description of peer review was given by an author called Cochrane Collaboration in 1872. He published a book that you may have heard of. It's called The Adventures of Pinocchio. Have you heard of it? Pinocchio? Yes? Everybody heard of it? Well, Pinocchio is supposedly a fable for children. It's not, isn't it? Collodi was a very complex character. One of the less known things about it is that he'd been to war 3 times in his lifetime. In the Italian Independence War. He'd done them all, and the first one he'd done as a volunteer against his own government. So he was a very, very complex character. But listen to this. This is the description of peer review. We are at the bedside of Pinocchio. Can you see him in the bed? He's lying over there. Pinocchio is ill. Pinocchio is the marionette, and he's ill. And his mother, who's a fairy, calls 3 wise men. And one after the other, the doctors came. A crow, an owl, and a talking cricket. grillo parlante in Italian.
I should like to know, signori,
said the fairy, turning to the three doctors gathered around Pinocchio's bed.
I should like to know if this poor marionette is dead or alive.
At this invitation, the crow stepped out and felt Pinocchio's pulse, his nose, and his little toe. Then he solemnly pronounced the following words. To my mind, this marionette is dead and gone, but if by any evil chance he were not, then that would be a sure sign that he's still alive. Now, this is a hospital consultant, and you can tell that by the ponderous way in which he delivers his verdict. Next, listen to this.
I am sorry,
said the owl.
I am sorry to have to contradict my cruel crow, my famous friend and colleague. To my mind, this marionette is alive. But if by any evil chance he were not, then that would be a sure sign that he's dead.
Now this guy speaks funny, so he must be a statistician.
And do you hold any opinion?
Said the fairy, asked the talking cricket, who stayed away. He was a very, very wise guy, so he has to be an epidemiologist. I say the wise doctor, when he does not know what he's talking about, should keep his mouth shut. This is peer review. This is the definition of peer review. This is how it works. Pinocchio is the manuscript. The fairy is the editor. And the three wise men are three referees, which each give a different opinion. The strange thing about this tale is that nobody changed their own opinions, like doctors do usually. But that may happen in a follow-up. Now, the origins of peer review in biomedical science are here at the bedside. So what we're looking at is 16th, 17th, 18th century medicine. This is the country general practitioner, the country family doctor, medical conductor, who calls in, has a strange case, doesn't know what's going on, calls in three experts. Very, very well-known experts to help him solve this case. Okay, so here are the origins of peer review, which is a nice, historical, gentle way of looking at things. And peer review is exactly that. It is a concoction of opinions. Good opinions, bad opinions, so-so opinions. But that's essentially, fundamentally, what it is. Now, what about the evidence base? It's good to have some kind of idea about the evidence base or something. Now, just pretend that I am the CEO, sole founder, sole investor in Pharmaton, a very well-known pharmaceutical company. And I am selling you Wonderscreen. I'm here to sell you Wonderscreen. And this is my pitch. Wonderscreen is a universal screening device. It distinguishes the good from the bad. It's got a massive franchising network. It's growing rapidly. We think it's about 60,000 franchising outlets. But we're not sure. Roughly, it's used by everybody in biomedicine, and it's growing. So at the end, I'm going to ask you to join us, please. Make lots of money. It's been extensively trialed, you know. We have 9 clinical trials testing whether people could recognize in which packet the instruction were. And then we've also got some before and after studies and checklists. I see some of you are pretty confused. This is a metaphor. Now, there's so many sociologists here that you must know what a metaphor is. We have two RCTs concentrating on readability of instructions, and one trial on the attitudes to one screen. But this is done on male residents of Goa. So hugely generalizable to the rest of the world, age 65 and above. Then we have two trials on dissemination of the instructions, and one comparative study on the validity of one screen. So please, will you come and join me? Come and join me. Use WonderScreen. Okay. Do you see any logical problems with what I've just said? Or things are missing? Please. Questions? What's WonderScreen? What's it for? And when I said it can distinguish the good from the bad, what does the good mean and what does the bad mean? I have just presented to you the evidence base for editorial peer review and grant application peer review in biomedicine. Codswallop is missing. There's something fundamentally missing. And the fundamental missing point is that we don't know whether this thing is any better than the alternatives. And we'll get to the alternative in a minute. In fact, the alternatives are not even defined. But basically, there is no evidence base to show that this is any better at doing whatever it's supposed to do. I'll get on to the business of what's good and what's bad in a minute. Please understand that this activity, with gentle birth, has been the subject of some series of congresses that Alan is going to tell us in a minute. But the bottom line is that it's never been tested. We have a lot of peripheral work on things like instructions, or whether blinding referees makes a blindness bit of difference, excuse the pun, and so on. Do people understand checklists? Well, maybe they do, maybe they don't. But the fundamental question is, does this thing work? Because it has a rather important role, or it's supposed to have a rather important role in everyday science environments. Now, here is what I would suggest a good study is. A good study is important. A good study is useful, relevant, methodological sound, it is ethical, it's complete, and it's accurate. But before we start jumping up and down and saying, wow, we've got finally a definition of good, this was a definition which we made up 12 years ago to look at the issue. It is not, no one's expressed agreement or disagreement with any of these. These are just points off the top of my review group, my Cochrane review group. But there is no agreement on the quality, or what a good manuscript is. These are reasonable points, but you may think of others and you may quarrel with this. You may not like these points. These are reasonable points. And if you accept this, then you should start having an evaluation grid. Something like this. Important definition. An important study is one, the findings of which have a major impact on healthcare. What does that mean? Well, it means that it changes health status, people's health status. People feel better because the study will live longer, because this study or this series of studies, good studies, have been published, whereas the rubbish has been thrown in the bin. The rubbish studies have been studies which were not important, were eliminated. Or it poses even process, it changes the process. For instance, change in healthcare delivery. What have we got? Well, we got citation rates. Over there, on the right, you see it? As a surrogate. And in fact, it's debatable whether it's even a surrogate for importance. We got media coverage. We got the number of letters. These are the indicators which are available to us and which in clinical medicine will not be allowed in any trial because they are weakly or perhaps unrelated, weakly related or unrelated to the main outcome, which is a change in health status or a change in healthcare delivery. Okay? Is the concept clear? Let's look at another one, for instance. Relevant. A study which is relevant. For instance, a study on a topic which is relevant to that journal reader, to journal's readers. If it's a journal, if it's a topic of gastroenterology, if the journal is gastroenterology, then the topic has to be relevant to gastroenterology and to their readers. Not all readers are interested in general gastroenterology. I don't know whether you know that clinical medicine is now fractioned into millions of different disciplines and sub-disciplines. So there are people who just do endoscopy. They do nothing else than endoscopies. So that they're interested in the parts of the gastrointestinal tract which are reached by viewing equipment. Everything else doesn't exist properly. So this end and the other end. And that's all and they don't meet in the middle. But that is what relevance means. So you would expect a continuous survey of authors, but most of all of editors and readers, and ask them, are you interested in the stuff that we're publishing? That, as far as I know, rarely happens. And again, what you've got is internet access, citation rates, correspondence. This is likely to be a self-selected sample, and it is probably non-generalizable from the sample. You can't generalize. So that, again, this is a surrogate which is not, it would be unacceptable. So we travel along with these surrogates. If indeed we do have data on these surrogates, because as you said at the very beginning, data is missing. But remember, these are data, and the data on what we would call surrogates. I wouldn't accept internet hits as an indicator of relevance. And I wouldn't accept, for instance, access as a positive indicator of interest. Let me just explain to you. 7 years ago, there was a Norwegian fellow called Jon Sudborg. We published a paper on the Lancet which had intense media coverage, which purported to show that things like ibuprofen, the kind of drugs that you can buy on the counter, caused mouth cancer. And he had 450 cases of mouth cancer in that paper, which is quite extraordinary, because mouth cancer is actually quite a rare cancer. And somebody started asking questions of Sudborg and his many co-authors, and it turned out that the whole thing was fabrication, fraud. It was being invented. And of course it fooled all the peer reviewers, and of course it fooled all the editors. But the point is that these citation rates and the accesses on that and still are astronomical, and they still continue, because you can still find the article on Wayback Machine. You can find it, you can access it. It's fraud. It's fraudulent. It's stuff for which Jon Sudborg really should have gone to jail. We don't have a system, an international system of police. So the point I'm trying to make is that these indicators, hard indicators, which we should be looking at, we are not looking at. We haven't looked at. Probably we never will look at. So you have to view peer review for what it is. An untested alchemy, which
may or may not be able to detect good papers, whatever we mean by bad papers, good grant proposal, grant from bad grant proposals, and most of all cannot detect in any great detail the kind of biases which are making international biomedical literature, especially as far as clinical studies are concerned, unreliable. There's more, I will spare you. These are just examples. Why do I say that international literature is unreliable? I'm talking about clinical trials now. You all know what a clinical trial is. It's an experiment carried out usually on drugs, but not necessarily just of drugs. And the only, in the case of drugs, the only reason for doing a trial is to sell the drug. You need to satisfy regulators that the drug is better than placebo, which is an identical, supposed to be an identical looking, smelling, tasting preparation as the real drug. Okay, if you look at this slide, which comes from the work that a group, German group, goes by the acronym of IQWiC. It is a government group is doing, which is sterling work. They've been doing some really exceptional work now for 3 or 4 years. This shows in a meta-analysis, which is a social science, meta-analysis started in social science, so you should all be very well aware. It shows the difference in results for the effectiveness of the antidepressant reboxetine between what's published, if you only consider published studies, and if you consider all studies. So if you only consider published trials, it's very, very favorable, or it's quite favorable. If you consider all trials, that's published, unpublished, unseen, and so on, the results are a lot less favorable. This is a particular form of reporting bias, which has been known for at least for 30 years, which is called publication bias. And reporting bias is important for a whole variety of reasons. The most important reason is because it is polluting, undermining, distorting world literature on pharmaceuticals, devices, and so on. You're taking a drug. If you've had a prosthesis inserted at some stage, or we will have in your life, then think about this. Do you think you know? The doctor thinks he knows, but he may not know what this prosthesis, or this drug, or this procedure does to you in terms of benefits and in terms of harms. So it's something that affects all of us, and it affects the whole of humanity. Other examples. Reboxetine I've just shown you. The stockpiled anti-influenza drug, oseltamivir, all of us have spent a huge amount of money on oseltamivir, even if you've never seen the drug, through general taxation. Huge stockpiles for something that only pharma or people who are related to pharma continue to say actually works. Gabapentin, the neuroleptic drug, a very famous early example. Vioxx, I'm sure you've all heard of Vioxx. I mean, Vioxx is probably the most. Rosiglitazone, Amanda, it's an anti-diabetic drug. This has been withdrawn from the market in one case and put under a black box in the other case. And again, oseltamivir twice. I'm not quite sure why. It's just that I've lived with it for 4.5 years, so I've got it in my brain. I apologize. In all these cases, what you see is not the reality. What you saw is not the reality. And peer review was completely incapable. Editorial processes were completely incapable of realizing what was going on. In some cases, even when they knew, they did not want to stop what was going on. And that's the problem that we have, which is related to the publishing industry, which
I think we need to perhaps discuss later on, because it's related to the problematics of peer review, but it's not directly involved in the lack of evidence of peer review. You may have heard of Drummond Rennie. I'm not sure whether you do, but Drummond Rennie is the guru. I've learned this morning, he's just retired. He's the guru of peer review, and he's got an aphorism. And he says, everybody's got a bad story about peer review, and that's very true. These are the worst ones. Now, these probably cost lives. No, sorry, they certainly cost lives. They also cost something else. They cost money. And if you think that that's, well, so what? Think about the alternative uses that that money were put to. Had we not been deceived into thinking that all these drugs had a profile that in fact they didn't. If you base yourself on publications, you will not find the total number of trials being done on top. If you base yourself on publications in biomedicine, you will not see the adverse events. You will see what a third party wants you to see. And I promise you that peer review will not be able to pick that up. I promise you. Please believe me. You will think that adverse events are complications, where in fact complications are adverse events. They're presented as complications of the disease, but they're adverse events of the drug. You will see trials being published 10 years after completion, but you will not know that the trial's been completed 10 years ago. And one day, in that case, you will not wonder why it's been published 10 years after completion. You will miss vital details, and most of all, you will think that the people who actually you see the name of in the paper are actually authors like Ken Follett. Like Ken Follett, the great novelist Ken Follett. He's an author, isn't he? Because he's got 2 or 3 researchers that do all the research for him, but he actually sits down and writes. I assume Jeffrey Archer, another very well-known, very honest personality. I assume these people write. Well, I promise you that the people you see the names next to mega trials, they don't write in most cases. Is peer review capable of identifying something which is being ghosted? Answer, in most cases, no. These go through, you know what a ghostwriter is, don't you? Yeah? You know what a ghostwriter, does anybody not know what a ghostwriter is? So you've got a written paper, you've got a ghostwriter, you have a guest authorship list, there's also guest presentership at congresses, people presenting corporate work as their own. So it's a triple whammy, if you like, it's 3 in 1. And this goes on. And these practices are supposed to be identified by peer review. They're supposed to identify what's going on, and they don't. The 7th cavalry is not coming. It's not even behind the hill. You're left to guess what the hell's going on. Now, this I urge you to read if you're interested in contemporary biomedicine, and because this will impact in a huge way on everything we do. The European regulators are the first regulators in the world that, depending on who you ask, are being coerced or are freely decided to make clinical study reports of clinical trials, of studies on humans, on drugs, mainly on drugs, or EMA only on drugs, available. These are the thousands of pages which underlie the article, the journal article that you read. Tens of thousands of pages. These will be mostly available from the 1st of January 2015. To some of us meaning those who asked, they've been available since 2010 as well.
But now they're going to be automatically available from the EMA website, and the policy you can read there from the 1st of January 2015. And this will have major repercussions. Have we got any publishers in the people working for publishing companies in one? Two? Okay. This will have a major repercussion, I think, on just about anything we do. It will have a major repercussion on clinical medicine and repercussions on publishing, on what I do, Cochrane reviews, and it'll have a major repercussion on peer review. I'm not sure whether I've expressed the concept. These are huge documents which are sent to regulators, which are detailed, incredibly detailed, with all the data which will be made available. These are still commercial documents, but they have the degree of detail and structure that will enable incredible scrutiny, which at the moment is not available, is not possible if you're looking at a 10 or 11 page publication. Okay, let me just show you a graphic of what I mean. Now, this slide is beautiful, isn't it? But the problem is with this slide is that the proportions are wrong. The tip of the iceberg is tiny. What's below the waterline is massive. You know the story of the Titanic. You know the Titanic hit not an iceberg, visible part of the iceberg, it hit the part that was below, that he couldn't see, the sort of ledge he could not see. So what you see is a poster, and you see the publication, if the trial is published. What you do not see is the mass which lies under the waterline being the journal. And that mass is going to start emerging from the 1st of January next year. Slowly start emerging. It will never be completely emerged, but it will start emerging. And our perception of the iceberg, and our perception of everything relating to clinical medicine will change. Also for slaves like me, life will change, because I'm going to have to read tens of thousands of pages instead of reading 2, 3. I won't go through what is under there, the items, but for instance, you can see the CDs everywhere, because CDs are required when you're looking at a CSR. It doesn't fit in a stick. You have CDs and DVDs. You need it. You also should have, but you never will have, case report forms. These are the case notes of everybody who is participating in a trial. And peer reviewers should go through those as well, on a random sequence perhaps, because there may be thousands of them, but they should go through those. So really, the peer review that has been done up to now on the 10-page summaries, 12-page summaries, is ridiculous, but we didn't realise that until very recently. This is study WP16263 of the Roche drug Tamiflu, which I remind you, we've all subsidised, because we've all spent huge money, huge sums of the public purse to stockpile it. This is for the Greens of you. Please relax. Only the top pages will be printed. Okay, this is on Peter Dosh's desk, Johns Hopkins. He's put together the numbers of pages which correspond to the unprinted readings. It's 8,545 pages long. In 2013, 10 years after the trial, it was finally published, and the publication was 7 pages long. The point I'm trying to make is somebody has decided what goes in the 7 pages. Somebody has decided to throw away 8,539 pages worth of information, or condense them, and we don't know who that somebody is, and most of all, we don't know why. Peer review never, in a million years, be able to
Will it get there once this kind of information becomes available? Well, we can discuss that later. This is another vision of the iceberg with an initiative which was launched, is a declaration, a Riot Declaration, restoring invisible and abandoned trials. Because apart from the invisible part, there's also the visible part which is distorted. All those drugs which I have shown have got distorted trials which were published, either because they were ghost written, or because the authors never saw the raw data, or for a variety of reasons. And this Riot initiative, Restoring Invisible and Abandoned Trials, is all about correcting the public record by presenting a audit trail so that you go from the clinical study report that you can see there on the left to a Riot publication that you can see down there on the right. But the point is that every choice, every decision is documented. You can go back to the clinical study report and argue if you so wish. And this is the kind of activity which journalists from now onwards should be engaged in. No more publication of Mickey Mouse 9-page trials. 10 pages, 12 pages. This is the kind of thing we should be doing. We should be linking the clinical study report, the widest possible source of information, and go into a commentary, a synthesized information with the possibility of linking backwards and forwards the whole time, checking and rechecking. Of course it's going to take time. And it's going to take a generation of professionally trained peer reviewers. It's going to mean abandoning some of the business models of publishers, but it's the only way out of the mess that I can see at the moment. If you don't think we're in a mess, go and give your uncle a tablet of Viados. Go and give somebody with renal disease a tablet of oseltamivir Tamiflu and see what happens. Okay, I'm nearly come to the end. So Flaminio, you see you didn't need to speak to me. Look at this. Yeah, 5 minutes. What are the salient aspects of the current peer review system? I think that the system, these are the salient aspects. If I were to describe it, this is what it's done. It's quality assurance through experts' opinion, the 3 wise men, the owl, the cricket. It manages competition for public space, publication space. It's about competing. I'm a big professor from a big university. I've got the biggest impact factor of them all. As we used to say at school, my impact factor is bigger than yours. So I go to the New England Journal of Medicine, which is the biggest, meanest journal, most famous journal. And then there's this is a Frank Davidoff thing, my colleague and friends. He said, don't forget, it's a scholarly task of improving scientific knowledge, which is something, I think, of the 3, it's the most credible of them all. It's the scholarly task of the continuously evolving science, our continuously evolving understanding, the Kuhnian paradigm shift, slowly, bit by bit. Let's be honest about why we use peer review. We use it to protect the journal's reputation. It's peer review. Oh, so it's okay. It ain't me, Gov. If there's a mistake, if there's a problem, it ain't me, Gov. It's the peer reviewers that say it was okay. Makes the journal more interesting. It reduces the in-house work for the editors. It provides acceptability for commercially funded studies. It provides acceptability for commercial enterprises, like publishing. And it's a tool for the academic promotion system. This is what peer review is in medicine. So if these are all the problems, what are the alternatives? Well, no change, that's an alternative. We all decide we're okay with the system as it is at the moment, let's go on. Or, no peer review, free for all. You want to publish something, as long as it doesn't have an insult to religion, an insult, insult to a person, it's not libelous, or an insult to a religion, swear word, you can go ahead and publish it. That's similar to blogging at the moment. Pre-publication, post-publication peer review, very much like is happening at the moment. A very closed model of peer review. Data extraction, data mining. I was given this morning. I was given something about tech mining. So you can do all sorts of statistical doodads with tech mining and so on. Citation rates of this word or that word. I'm sure there's some clever algorithm that could be used. Or what I think is the panacea. We take out the competition. We take out the competitive element, and we take it back to what it should be, or what medicine should be, which is service to humanity. We take out the competition. We take out competition for space. Competition for space. Journals are space, and it's all about the fact that if I can get my paper in, you can't get yours because space is limited. Okay? So, instead of competition, we put in another word which begins with C, but which is not a swear word. It's called collaboration. Then we may begin to work together to make sure that modern medicine and modern biomedicine is humane and ethical. I think that the future, the immediate future, are going to be, as far as trials are concerned, that editors are going to have to start using what I showed you, commentaries and versions, which are linked directly to clinical study reports on the website, whereby readers, those readers who wish to do so, can go and check and have a look. There's a problem with all this. There are several problems. For instance, I don't believe that a single trial should be available. I think a whole family, the so-called program, should be available for reasons which are to do with the fragmentation of evidence and the hiding of evidence under other guises. But these are technicalities. So I think that we are at a crossroads. I don't think the current system can go on for very much longer because it is becoming rapidly discredited. And I think that major changes are going to have to occur in this black box. It's not going to be a black box anymore. We're going to have schools training for peer reviewers, and peer reviewers are going to have to be paid. You've got to pay people to go through 8,500 pages, or at least to go through a distilled section of these pages, because of the responsibility of editors and peer reviewers have. And the responsibility is beginning to appear for what it is, massive. So changes in the wind. Don't believe me, look at what's going to happen in the next 10 years. Thank you very much for listening to me.
Thank you, Tom. Any question? Right.
Yeah, thank you very much, Tom. It's extremely interesting, and I'm not a clinical trials expert, but could you help me understand? I am aware of something called the consort standards for clinical trials, for example, and I thought that those were designed to help eliminate a lot of this selective reporting and biases that you talked about. Is that am I misunderstanding that, or is it well intended but not well executed, or?
Thank you, Brent. That's another intelligent question. Consort is an acronym. The last two words, it's to do with clinical trials. It is a reporting framework, not how to conduct, how to report. So if I want to publish it on the Journal of Very Important Results, and the Journal of Very Important Results embraces consorts, then it has to follow the consort. The problem, you know what the problem with this is? All of these instruments are based on publications. I have a visual, it's going to take me a little while to find it, but I have a visual example of what I mean. And it's to do with that pile of paper. Consort is based on publications, so the elements of consort
you must have this, 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 and this, are based on what you expect from 1 million publications. Here, we're in a completely different ballgame with clinical study reports. We have far more detail. If I've got a minute, I can maybe find a slide. No, sorry, it's another presentation. I can't do that. Maybe at the break I'll show you.
Any other? Anna?
I just wanted to ask you, Tom, about, you said in the beginning that you will also talk about your experiences with other fields. You know, you talked about medicine, so
Yes.
what are your experiences?
Yes, we, in 2004, that's Frank Davidoff, Marika Ferri and I, did a little survey amongst archaeologists, editors of archaeology, geology, chemistry, physics, maths, and law. Doctors are terrible, as you know. We think that the whole world revolves around us, but there are other parallel worlds. So we asked them, what do you do in your, what editorial, what system do you have to assure quality, and can you define quality? And it was a negative survey. They all use the same system. None of them could really define quality. They haven't thought what quality meant, which is not to damn them. It's a damning on the whole of science. And archaeologists are pretty, all of them, archaeologists, physics graduates are incredibly relaxed. But archaeologists are relaxed in a way, there's so few jobs that it's a pretty cutthroat, it is a pretty cutthroat activity. So it was very interesting, but they all use the same model, which is the model that Collodi described. Oh, and we couldn't get the paper published, of course, because it wasn't medicine. So who cares what geologists do?
Stefan?
Thank you for the presentation. First of all, if I understood correctly, your model for future peer review is kind of open publication where afterwards some people, maybe paid reviewers, evaluate the claim of the papers. If that is correct, what are the incentives for people to publish papers? What are the incentives? How careers are evaluated this
Well, it's certainly not with an impact factor, because the impact factor was never meant for that. Gene Garfield didn't. You know the origin of the impact factor, why we have an impact factor. It's a marvelous instrument. Developed in 1962, started being developed in 1962, and it was aimed at librarians. Do you remember librarians? Those little old ladies sitting in those big rooms with huge piles of journals, they're all in right order, beautiful, musty smell. Well, once upon a time there was a librarian, and the librarian had a budget of, I don't know, $10,000 or something a year, and she said, I have to renew access, i.e. subscription, to all these journals, and it's not going to stretch to $10,000, because all this stuff now, it's gone out, it cost me $15,000. So how am I going to decide what I'm going to subscribe to and what I'm not going to subscribe to? And the answer was the impact factor. I will subscribe to people, to those journals which are most cited. Because the journals that are most cited are probably the ones that people are most interested in. And that's how the impact factor was born. And that's all it is. It's a measure of citation. Interest. Show interest, not quality.
Yes, but what are the incentives for publication and not an access system, open publication system? This is not answering the question.
What are these? What are my incentives? You mean for publishing? Because I want to have my say. I want to say what I want to write, what I think. I want to comment.
That's work for some people, maybe people with tenure, but people with built-in a career, how can they build a career based on this system? I'm not criticizing, I'm try to understand your view.
You can't build a career on an impact factor because well, it's like, how can you build a career on an impact factor? It's like going on a train line with a bicycle. It wasn't meant for that. It's the distortion of the system and the inability of the system to think about what they want and how to select that has brought that. The impact factor is easy. You just pay some money to Thomson Reuters, and whoa, every year you get the impact factor. But it wasn't meant for that.
Yes, that's so you know that people are quite interested in careers.
Yes, well, hang on a minute.
That's the
But unless these points are made to them as they're young, when they get to rector, they will not be, then they will be able to change the system. Maybe. Huh? Otherwise, you're going to remain with a system based on impact factor and all the distortions are just...
I think I have a related question. Basically, the point is that we might use bad proxies for our works, but still we need some proxies. So unless we figure out a better system, we are not going to abandon the old system. So that was probably the point of this question. We are using wrong maps to find our way, but still there are maps, so we are using them. And I have a question which is related to this. How would you measure, how you will select quality with another system?
I have to show you. I have to show you a framework for what I say is quality, but don't take my word for it, let's have an international debate. I have shown you an explicit framework to identify a scientific paper which is of good quality. It's an explicit framework with definitions and outcomes.
Yes. So, just since you mentioned the framework, but the first point on your framework is that the result is that scheme that you've shown, right? You mentioned as the first requirement the fact that it must have an impact on health. And that's exactly what a study that don't get normally published will not pass as a test. Because if you make a study that shows that some drug has no effect, then it doesn't pass your first point in your checklist, your explicit checklist. Am I correct on this? So
if you adopted a system like this, you would have to wait years. Okay, because it doesn't take. It's not the paper published today and papers. The drug comes out today and you have an impact on the health system immediately. It would take some time.
But then it might have a negative result, not a positive one. A negative result, the computation bias, which I think is the most important problem in the biomedical system, which if only positive results tend to be published. You want to overcome it unless you really change also the culture of creating incentives to people that does things correctly and doesn't get the result. So this should be foremost in your
I entirely agree, but this was proposed 12 years ago, what I just showed. And to my knowledge, nobody's shown any interest. And since then, we have had, as I showed you, a variety of scandals which have shown that faulty papers, because we're talking about it, it's over peer review now, faulty papers have been published, they've been used to commercialize products which were not what we thought they were. My problem is not a drug which doesn't work or doesn't. Most of these drugs have got beneficial effects that I'm aware of. The problem is that those beneficial effects have been either inflated, the harms have been ignored, or the beneficial effect is on something completely different, which we didn't know anything about. But all this has been submerged. All this is hidden. All this has not been, we haven't been able to see it, and we haven't been able to discuss it. And And that's where the problem is. It is not an open system. It is not an open, democratic, accountable system. That is where the problem lies, if you like.
Michelle?
I feel like the case of biomedical research is so distinctive given how closely tied it is to big pharma. So I'm wondering how much the paper is a little bit presented as an indictment of peer review, but would you feel more comfortable seeing an indictment of biomedical research in peer review?
It's not an indictment of peer review. Yes, I would agree with you. It's an indictment of the whole biomedical system. Concurrent biomedical research background. Peer review is not capable of identifying any of these. Peer review is what Collodi described. It's a gentle, scholarly activity, or should be a gentle, scholarly activity. Instead of which it's being wielded as an infallible, oh, this is peer review, it's a peer-reviewed publication, therefore the stuff is good. You get indexed on the basis of the presence of peer review. It's being promoted for something it isn't. It may become so in the future, but no one appears to be willing to invest in it, to test it scientifically and find its limits, real limits, or its real benefits. And this is what I mean. This was the significance.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask you whether you think, with the publication and the importance, what you're suggesting actually is that by having results available, you will get rid of negative not being published, negative studies not being published. But do you think that actually the current legislation in the United States and now in the European Union is changing the publication system in biomedicine? So if we're going to have all this data available, how will it affect, or how it will affect the publishing in biomedicine or in clinical research?
Let's put this in perspective. When I started on the Tamiflu update, which has led to all this, to the practical application of all this was mid-2009. So we're talking about a space of 5 years. In 5 years, we have had a sea change. And I can't put it if I could put it stronger than that, a complete revolution. Nobody's heard of clinical study reports outside pharma and CSR writers. CSRs are beginning to be understood for what they are, which is still commercial documents, maybe incomplete, but a lot more evidence, and a lot more and better presented and better understandable. So I think that at this pace, we've had the new trials directive in the European Union, directing CSRs to be made available, which is, Glenis Wilmot, wonderful. Thank God for Ireland, and thank God for the Irish MEP. It's a sea change from where we were 4.5 years ago. It took us 6 months to reconstruct the trial program, all the trials of oseltamivir and Tamiflu. It took me 1 day last week to reconstruct the trial program of the vaccine I'm working on, because it's beginning to be all available. So this has been an incredible move, quickly, in a really short space of time. People have been going on about reporting bias, publication bias for years. The earliest recorded is Science 1986. That's what Ben Golding cites. I don't know whether I don't know whether that's right or wrong, but it's been going on for at least 30 years. Ian's been battling against this for at least 30 years. Nothing has happened. All of a sudden, it's all clicked. It's all gone in a way. If there's any sense to the deaths of the people who were on those drugs, then this is the sense. They've helped science. Unfortunately, they're dead, but then there's nothing we can do about it.
George?
Yeah, and maybe a question related also to Michelle's remark. You seem to be very critical of the peer review process. Well, the examples you used are indeed very serious, but are they not more related to whole biomedical research backed by big pharmaceutical companies? Isn't that more the problem than the problem of peer review? I think we all agree that peer review can be improved. There are things that are not working optimally, but you seem to connect the two quite strongly.
Mine is a form of information bias. And I'll tell you why. Because we know more about the pharmaceutical. In fact, all our knowledge comes from the pharmaceutical field. There is an unexplored continent which is represented by the sites, by trials and studies sponsored by NIH, MRC in UK and so on. We don't know what happens to those studies. But those that get published, what do they have CSRs? Do they have reports? We don't know. And I think what you're saying is fair. Yes. But then these are the examples which people latch onto. And the message I'm giving you is that nobody now is that nobody should be immune from this. We should all, if we're engaged in a trial, make all data available once it's been anonymized. If there are commercial secrets, I'm not interested in commercial secrets. I wouldn't know a commercial secret if they hit me between the eyes. I'm not interested in that. And I'm not interested in recognizing patients, participants, identifying them. So, fine, let's anonymize those bits. All the others should be freely available. They should be freely available. No gaming, just make them freely available. Now, I understand you want to break up the adverse events, and you want to break them up and camouflage them as different things. Fine, do that, but I'm going to find you out. That's the message, like we have done.